Just waiting for YouTube to wake up. There we go, we're live. And thank you very much for joining me. My name is John Stevenson. Welcome to Practicalli. And today we're going to do some more experimentation with Clojure and consuming APIs. So this is a very common thing to do when you're dealing with web applications. You'll take some structured data, usually in JSON, and you'll grab that from a server somewhere, or and then you'll transform that and use that data to actually do some business logic as well. So we'll have a look at that. Big thank you to everybody who's subscribed to us so far. We've got nearly 200 subscriptions to the channel, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for the donations as well. I've also, in celebration, I've also got a new t-shirt as well, so I'll be wearing this at the Reclojure conference on Monday, which is the first community conference in London for Clojure. So that'll be a really good, fun day, a chance to meet getting on for about 200 people in the Clojure community in and around London and the wider area as well. We've got a few people coming in from Europe as well, so it should be great. Okay, and so as usual, there's all the information on the Practicalli website, and as you can see, I've updated my logos a little bit. So I did a few extra things. So I added the fact that we're using clojure-cli and tools deps now, so I've added those into just give like a quick visual indication of all the things we're working with. And Clojure is very much a language of small pieces that work very well, very specifically. So it can be a little bit confusing when you first start Clojure. Like, there's no one big framework that you must learn. You actually have to think about what you actually want to do and make decisions, which can be a bit scary if all you've ever done is just use a framework. So so I'm trying to give you some insight into what are the different tools and libraries and projects you can use to glue things together to solve very specific problems, which at the end of the day, that's what software is designed for, is for solving very specific problems. And so you need some very specific tools to do that very efficiently. And so all the broadcasts are on here, the book's working on there. I've done some updates on the Clojure web apps stuff, and all the work we've been doing in these last few study groups is going to go into this book as well. And so any feedback on that would be much appreciated. If you want to get in touch, then please reach out to me on the Clojure Slack community. I've got a Practicalli channel if you just want to talk to me directly, or you can send me a direct message as well if you want to, if you don't want to discuss anything in a public forum. But there's also lots of really interesting and helpful channels on that Slack community as well. There's a beginners channel where you can go and ask any question about Clojure you want, and you get a lot of feedback and supports, and everybody's really friendly there as well. There's no idea of silly questions. Any question, no matter how silly you think it is useful, and you might get people scratching their heads about how to explain some things as well, which helps them understand Clojure a little bit better as well. And if you want to sponsor me, then subscribe to my videos, or you can sponsor my charity ride that I did just recently, or PayPal me if you want to donate in any currency, and GitHub sponsoring if you want to sponsor that in US dollars. And again, thank you for everybody who has already contributed and kept me going. It's much appreciated. So actually today is the 13th month of these broadcasts, so we've been going over a year. And so I just want to thank everybody for watching and taking part and getting involved. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, I've started writing a blog. I have to admit I haven't actually finished writing it. So last time we were looking at Clojure web apps, and we built a web server from scratch using deps.edn, and then we did some routing on there so we could actually have an API and deliver some JSON. And as I mentioned, it's nice to have a client to be able to try out the JSON API that we're designing to make sure that it's fit for purpose. Is it a good design? Is it easy to use? Is it massively overcomplicated like some of the APIs that we might try out today? So if you click on this, at least the first part of this article is complete, and I'll finish the rest of it off over the weekend. So we want to consume APIs, and most of that is done in the JSON format. And the JSON is the JavaScript object notation. So yeah, I think there's a phrase that says that JavaScript has eaten the world. It's not quite, but it's very prevalent, certainly on the client side of things, and certainly in the web. And JSON is one of those things that is quite a simple notation, quite a simple data structure you can use to be able to send data around in a very simplistic way. You don't have to worry about different languages. Pretty much every language can consume JSON, and it's a bit like XML, except it's a lot simpler, and there's a lot less angle brackets in there as well. And the nice thing is it's quite simple. It is basically just a set of key value pairs. So you've got a key and a value, and the value can be another key value pair, and so on and so on. So you can have quite nested JSON data structures there as well. So JSON isn't a closure data structure. So one of the first things we do if we're working with JSON is actually to convert it to a closure data structure. And so then it makes it a lot easier to work with, because we can just use all the normal functions that come with Clojure. So everything that's in clojure.core, we can just use that, and off we go. We don't need to worry about kind of the specifics of JSON. We can very easily transform JSON into a map or maps and vectors. And so there's several ways. We're going to look at clojure.data.json, which will help us do that in a very simple way. But there's also Cheshire and Transit, and I think there's another project called Jet that's quite nice as well. So we'll have a look at these in a different broadcast. But there's one simple way we can get stuff from the internet or even from a file, and that's the function slurp, which is built into Clojure. It's part of the Clojure core, and slurp is kind of like I guess the name comes from a milkshake. If you got a really thick, creamy milkshake, obviously a vegan one for me, then the way you drink it is you slurp it in. You go. So it's I think that might be where the name came from. And so you're basically sucking in data from the outside world. And we might mention Postman as well, which is another way for like testing APIs as well. Okay, so we're going to start off by creating a project, and feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along. So as we've done so before, we've created projects. Oops, too far. We are using the Clojure command line tools to do this. And I'm using CLJ new, and so if you don't have that, we did cover that before. So if you go to CLJ new, this is a project by Sean Caulfield, who's basically created a tool to be able to allow you to create new projects very easily. And so you can go in and you can either run this command, or what I've done is just added an alias to my Clojure config in clojure.deps.edn, and so this allows me to just basically do Clojure main, Clojure net new, and then I can use a template, and there's a few templates built into Clojure new, but you can also use the lining and boot templates as well, although they do create lining and boot projects, so you'll still need to add your own deps.edn file, but there are some tools to allow you to help you help you generate the deps.edn file from the lining and boot dependency project configuration file. Okay. So we did cover that in the blog posts earlier, so I'm not going to go through that again. So here we go. And if you don't have that, you can always just clone the Practicalli simple API as well, which is a project. So this has just got the simple project in, so you can clone this and then you can use that to build everything that we're doing during this broadcast. Okay, so I'm going to create this. I think I've already got this. Let's change my terminal. Oh, it's all the way over there. So yeah, I'm creating this. I'm using Clojure. You can use Clojure or CLJ. It doesn't actually matter because we're not running a REPL in this case. We're just running a command. Essentially, we're just running this new plugin, and this will create. So I'm going to put it in the name Practicalli. You could use your own name, your own domain here. Could be your GitHub username or your company name or just what you call your collective projects. And this is going to be a simple API client. So we're going to create that. And if it's the first time you've run Clojure new, then it will go and download a few things from the internet. And it's generated a project for me called Simple API Client, based on the app template, which is very simple. So if we just go into Simple API Client, oops. I've got a few things that name similarly. There we go. We'll have a look at that. So it's very simple. We've got a deps.edn file, which is our configuration. We've got a README file for, especially when we put it onto GitHub, so people know what the project's all about. And then we've got our source and test paths, our class paths. And so these will both be added to our project by the deps.edn configuration. And so we've got this simple API client, which is our main entry point into the project, and a test namespace that will basically is designed to test this particular application. Okay, so let's load that up into my editor. I'm using Spacemacs, but you can use any editor you want that's Clojure aware. That's, what do we call this? Consume APIs. Let's open that. That's one I did earlier, so we don't want that one. Simple API client. And let's open the deps.edn file for now. There we go. So we've just got our paths. So by default, it's going to include a resources folder and source folder. And we're pulling in Clojure 1.10.1, which is the current latest stable release. And then we've got a test path here, a test alias, so we can run some tests, and a test runner, so we can actually just run that, run all the tests as a kind of a batch job in there as well. So this is like a test runner plugin, and this is just adding the test directory to our project, to our class path, and it's adding this test check library there as well. Okay. And if we open our source file, then there's not an awful lot in there at the moment. Just a very simple thing there. Oh yes, I don't do a lot. The only notable thing is it's got a gen class, so we can run this from the command line if we wanted to. But apart from that, we've just got a main function, which, as it says, it doesn't do a lot yet. So we do that. And I'm going to start my REPL in here. You could just do this in the terminal if you went to and go back to your terminal and just run. If you just run CLJ, or if you've got rebel readline, you can do Clojure -a. And that would run a REPL on the command line. And you just need to require the simple API clients, and then just change into that namespace, and you're ready to go. So I'm going to do it in here because I've got some code already put up on there as well. Any questions? No questions. No questions so far. Everybody's glued to my every word. There we go. So let's have a look at slurp. So as I mentioned, we can do something very simple by just using the slurp function. So I'm just going to put some REPL experiments in here. So if I'm not sure what I'm doing, or if I just want to explore, I just want to do a spike around kind of trying to understand what I'm trying to build, then I'll do like a little REPL experiments section. And I'll just put some Clojure code in and evaluate it, and maybe also keep a track of the results of that, so I can see what kind of things I can do with the data I'm working with, and what kind of algorithms and functions I actually need. So if we go back and look at the blog post, that's not the right one. There we go. So there's a section on getting content. So before we have a look at APIs, we just have a brief aside at just getting some simple content, because this is mainly what Slurp is kind of better at. We can get some content from the internet just using Slurp. We can also get this locally as well. If there's a local file, we could just put the local file name relative to the kind of the root of the project. And here we're calling slurp with an argument, and that argument is the location of the thing that we want to pull in. In this case, it's just a web address for the project Gutenberg, and it's going to pull it in the text of a book. And if you just evaluate that, comma EF, then it'll take a few moments, and then it's gone off and pulled the text from this website, and it's basically pulled down the body of the request and returned this as a string. So you can see we've got all the text there. It's truncated to get bigger in the display, just because it will be huge to have it all displayed in my editor. But you can see that yeah, it's a string. It's opening with a string, and it's just the text of the book. And so it's a very simple way to just grab something from the internet. And we can also do that. We can use Slurp for an API as well. So back, if you remember, back in, I don't know when it would be, but we did we built a game scoreboard API many moons ago. I think back in episode 16 and 17, we built this game scoreboard, and we used Swagger to document that, so we can see all the API calls that we can make. So basically all the different URLs we can use to get some information, and so it shows us what kind of a response we're going to get, but we can also go and try it out as well. Here we don't have any scores on the scoreboard because this application doesn't have a database. It'll just, every time it restarts, it will start again from no scores. But we can generate some random scores. That's one of the APIs that we created. So if I try this out, then I'm getting a response back is the new score that's been generated. And if I keep pressing try out, then it keeps on adding lots of random scores. So we've got random player ID. It's a little bit bigger. Whoops, there we go. So you got random player ID and a random score each time. And so that is a kind of simple way to generate a scoreboard. And so this is just JSON that we're returning. So you can see the response content type is application JSON. We could also try like Eden and Transit and other things as well. But for this case, because most of the world uses JSON for their API, then we'll stick with JSON for now. If we go back to our scoreboard, then we can see that when we try this out now, then we've got all the scores that were there as well. So this application is just keeping all the data in a Clojure atom, And so then we can just grab that and update that as we change it. And so that atom is acting as a like in-memory database for just this simple application. Oop, no questions. We've got 5 people watching. There we go. So we're going to use this. We're going to pull information from here. And this does time out every 30 minutes because it's on the free plan. I haven't actually paid for this one because it's not really a commercial application. It's just a little hobby project. So I'm just running it as a simple kind of just using the free credits of Heroku. Thank you very much, Heroku. And so we're going to pull some information from that. And so again, we can use Slurp for that as well, just to kind of see what we get from the application from the API. So we're going to Slurp Scoreboard. So I'm just going to comma E semicolon, and it's giving us this. Again, we're giving it a string, but inside the string there is a data structure, and this data structure is the JSON data, and it's got strings within strings, so we have to escape the strings around the keys. So it's a little bit more fiddly in terms of working with. It's not pure JavaScript because we're printing out as this string, and obviously if we didn't escape the string with the backslash, so we got the backslash here and it's escaping the double quotes that are around the keys that identify that it's a string key in JSON. So it's not the most ideal content to work with, but we could do something with that. But it gives us a quick idea about what kind of things are in there. So you can see that it's got a player ID, we've got score, we've got player ID, we've got score, and we could pretty print this and make it look a little bit nicer. So if we take that, boom, boom. If we space K wrap. If we wrap this with, there's a nice handy library called clojure-cli print, which we don't need to include as a dependency. It's already pulled in as a dependency by default as part of the closure. But we do need to specify its full name or include this in the namespace definition as a require. And so we want to pprint. And this will just, it's like print, but it will pretty print it, which means it will print it as a kind of like a nest. If we got a nested structure, it'll print it out in like on different lines, so it's a little bit easier to see the structure. So if we evaluate this, we get nil, which is correct because all the print functions are all side effecty. They're just going to return nil, and the actual content they do is push to the standard out, which is usually in the REPL. Where is that? Oh, it should be in there. Why is that not there? Oh, that's not good. That was working yesterday. Excuse me. Why did that not work? Boom. Oh, there we go. There it is. Yeah, so it's kind of showing me. Let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So it's showing me the outputs in a nicer format, except I think it's the older format. Oh, that's an old one. That was the stuff I was experimenting with yesterday. So it shows you. Oh yeah, that's the YouTube stuff, isn't it? Yes. I'm not sure why that's not showing that. Strange. But anyway, it just formats this in a nicer way. Okay. when it's working. Let's see. So it's not quite JSON, so we want to convert that into, well, it is JSON, but it's a big string, which is okay, but we want to convert that into clojure. And so we can use this clojure data.json library. And we can then slurp in the scoreboard and use this read string function to convert the string that we're getting back into a JSON file. So let's have a look. So if we go back to my editor, if we go back to one I created earlier, so we need to include the clojure data JSON as a require, but we also need to include this as a dependency. Oops, if I can spell. So this is what we've got in here. So we're going to grab clojure.data.json and put this into our new project. So this is just the old project I was looking at. Deps.edn. So this is the project we just created, and so we've got a deps in here, and we've got our aliases. I'm going to make, there we go. I like to put spaces in between things, just makes it a bit easier to follow the different sections. So we've got a section here on dependencies, and this is just a map with the name of the library that we want to pull in and the version of the library that we want to use. So we can just add clojure.data.json and add the latest version, which is 0.2.7. We save that, and I'm just going to restart my REPL. Cool. Let's check I don't have another REPL running. Oh, yes I do. Oh, that might be why. Kill. There we go. I think I had two REPLs running. There we go. Cool. Okay. I think that's why the pretty print wasn't showing up, because it was probably showing in a different REPL window. Okay, so I've added clojure.data.json, and so if we go back to our code, we just need to include this in as a require. Oops, there we go. And if I just jump back to the previous project for a moment, I'm just going to copy it from there. Nope, that's broken. There we go. Oops. Cool. There we go. And so yeah, so I want this require. I'm going to grab the whole thing because we're going to use HTTP client as well. I'll grab that. Oops, wrong one. Tab. So push that in. Oops. More thumbs today. Oops, sorry. There we go. I think I'm still tired from my pack run. There we go. So I'm only going to use this one initially, so the other ones are going to still say they're not being used. In fact, I think I'm not going to. I don't think I'll use that one, but there we go. And while I'm here, I may as well go and get the other. Get the other dependency I want to include. I guess I should have done that before. So we go to the deps.edn. I'll put all this in there into the blog post so you can follow that as well. 0. There we go. So So as well as those, boom, there, we paste those in. So we've got Clojure. We're going to use HTTP kit this time around, but you can also use CLJ HTTP. They're very similar projects. We built HTTP kit. We built the server that we did last time with HTTP kit. So this time we're going to use the client library of that. So client namespace, which the client namespace pretty much has the same API as CLJ HTTP. I think CLJ HTTP is a little bit simpler to use, but HTTP kit has more features, I think, and is designed to kind of be a very complete client, so you can use it with long-running polling and WebSockets and futures and promises and all that kind of thing as well. So this is kind of like everything you could need, and CLJ HTTP is just a really useful client you can use to get going. So you can use one or the other of those. Okay, I'm just going to start my REPL up again and sort of load in those libraries as dependencies, and then we can use them. Ooh. There's a question from the audience. Will I be at Reclojure on Monday? I will be at Reclojure on Monday, and I've been asked to introduce some and possibly all of the speakers. So I'll be around. Feel free to ask me any questions while you're there. I'll probably be wearing this t-shirt, so you'll be able to spot me fairly easily. I'll be the person at the front trying to fill in the gaps if anything goes wrong. Okay, so we've got a REPL running, and we have oh yes, what was it? So let's switch back to our source code. So this is our simple API client, and so we've required the three libraries. So we're going to use clojure.data.json first, and we're still going to use slurp just to kind of show you what just how much we can actually do with slurp. So we can still get the random score, but we can put this in around this data.json thing, which we've aliased as JSON, so we don't have to type in clojure.data.json / the names of functions. We can just type in JSON instead. So let's do that. Let's create a function call. So we're going to do JSON, and then we're pulling in some JSON, so we want to be able to read that. We're pulling it in as a string, so that's what the function is called. It's called JSON read string. And the JSON we're going to read in is from the slurp that we're pulling in here. Boop. There we go. So if I do this, if I evaluate this, what are we going to get? Oh, it's thinking about it. Oh, this is why I need a new computer. There we go. I do have one on order, so I should have something faster by the new year, hopefully. And you can see this is now, you can see the difference between, well, let's just make this as a comment, so comma EF, comma E semicolon in Spacemacs. So we've got a string that contains kind of a data structure in here, whereas now we've got just a normal Clojure data structure. As we've got player ID, so we can play around with these things and pull things out of there as well. So I guess we should be able to do, we could just get the first entry of this. Let me grab this bit of code. And so if we wrap this with a function, so the first thing is a vector that contains multiple maps. So if we get the first map, then we can, Let's see what we got. So we'll have a lot less data, so it's easier to see what's actually going on. There we see, we just got, so this is one entry in our scoreboard. Although we're actually, because we're doing random score, we're generating new scores each time. So we probably just should use scoreboard for now. So let's change that over to so rather than random score, I believe it's scoreboard. Let me just double check on the API thing there. So if we go and have a look at our API, our Swagger, so this is the server that's running on Heroku, and so this tells us all the things I can call, and it's just game scoreboard, and I don't need to send any data over there. I can just do a simple get from that as well. So this is why it's working. So if we call this scoreboard, there we go. So it should get the same, more or less the same result, because I think it adds it to the end of that end of the scoreboard each time. Yeah, there we go. So now we've got a map, and yeah, I can do things with a map. When I've got the vector of maps, then obviously I could do things. I could like map over those with the map function, or filter out player IDs that we wanted to do that. So if we've got multiple, here we've just got like individual player IDs. There's no kind of grouping of this is a player and here it scores. We've got this is a player ID and this is a score that that player got. So we could basically search for all the scores for a particular player, because the players based on a player ID, and we could do that just by if there's nothing in the API for us to do that, then we can actually just take the JSON data structure and play around with it, transform it, and yeah, and map and reduce over it to get the specific data that we want. So we can kind of do quite a lot with just slurp, but slurp's only getting the body of the response, so you don't get any of the metadata, any of the data around the HTTP response. So if you remember back in the ring, if we go back to the article we did last time, so when we looked at routing, this diagram here where we've got messages coming in from the client into our adapter on the server, and then it's transforming that into a hash map as a request, and it goes all the way through there. We do some business logic with it and return it back as a response map. And that has a whole bunch of information which the adapter then sends back to the client as a HTTP request, and we can have a look at that using if we move away from Slurp and move into using HTTP kit or CLJ HTTP, then we can see the whole of the response there as well. So we're going to have a look at that next. So consuming API. So we go back to our new project. How far did I get on this? Did I miss anything? Okay. So we convert to closure. Oops, I need to check the formatting. But yeah, we've got basically got player IDs and scores in a. Each of those are in a map, and it's in a vector of all those maps. And we could add CLJ HTTP kit, which we've already done, which I'll add in. This is a bit I haven't actually finished in the blog post yet, so I apologize for that. It will be finished by the end of today, hopefully. And let's see, where do we go to? Oh yes, so if I switch back to the project I did earlier, which is number 4, cool. So we can see that we can start going on with the HTTP. I'm just going to grab this section and have a play with it. Whee! Because there's a few interesting things to have a look at with HTTP kit. What else did I do? Oh yes, on the YouTube stuff as well. There we go. Yeah, I think we should have time to just have a quick play with the YouTube things as well. It took me ages to figure out. I don't know. There we go. That'll do it for now. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Boop. So Slurp's quite useful, and if you just want the body of the request, then that's fine. But we've got HTTP kits, so we're going to use the client this time. And as we saw, we've included this at the top. So we've included HTTP kit clients, and I've just given it as an alias of HTTP because I couldn't think of anything better because I already use client for CLJ HTTP. But yeah, as I said, I'd probably only have one of these, and I just call the alias client. I probably should have just done that as well. I'll do that in the blog, in the post-processing of this. So it does the same kind of thing where we're going to send off a get message, which is effectively what Slurp is doing, and we're going to get a response. So we've got HTTP, which is the alias for HTTP get client, and we're calling its get function, and we're giving it the here we're just giving it the website of Practicalli, just see what it looks like when we get some text. But when we call this, you can see that it's giving some strange kind of feedback. It's not the value. That's not what my blog says. But it states pending. So this is actually a promise. As HTTP kit doesn't just return the value; it returns a promise because it's going to allow you to deal with the asynchronous nature of the website of the internet. So you don't always get an instant response back. So it will give you a promise, and then eventually it will, when it's ready, it'll give you the result. So you can use futures and promises in that. So you can do quite a lot of advanced stuff in here. But if we just want to get the value, we can use the deref function, and this will kind of basically force it to give us the actual value of that promise. And this is just like if you've got an atom, if you used an atom before in Clojure or a ref type to hold some data, then you also need to deref that to get the value inside this. So you can consider this, the result of this is a container for the actual result of the HTTP call. And so if we do deref here, we should get so we get the response back, and we're actually getting the response is using the ring style of managing the data. So we've got like this idea of a ring response map that we're returning. So it's giving us a hash map as a result with keys. So we've got keys ops and so on and so on. And the body itself, though, is that can be whatever the content type is set to, or whatever it defaults to. So like here we're just using HTML as the body type, so we can pull out specifically just the body and have a look at that, but we can also have a look at the other data there as well. I'm going to delete that because it's going to make my file very big. And so we can either use the deref function explicitly, or more commonly you would just use the @ sign as the syntactic shortcut for doing that as well. So that does the same thing. So it does exactly the same thing. It's just a convenience. So you don't have to type deref all the time, and it does mean that there's one less pair of brackets that you have to worry about if you are worried that Clojure has too many brackets. There's ways of minimizing that. And so we can actually narrow down, because we've got a map, then we can use the Clojure functions like get to narrow down what we're doing. So here we're again kind of doing exactly what Slurp would be doing. we're just looking at the body of that, and we're just returning that as a string. And so we're just getting from the HTTP request the value that the key called body is pointing to. And we can write that shortcut. We can just use the fact that the key is a keyword. We can use that because that's a function. We can use that as a function call and say this is the same as getting me the value of body in the map that this when we deref the get function, we want to get the body, the value the body is pointing to from that. So we get a string of the HTTP HTML. And so we can get the same thing from our get. If we go to our scoreboard, let's just check that this is still working. There's no smoke and mirrors here. It's all live coding and live evaluation. Yeah, there we go. So we're getting other things in here. So we're getting things that I don't really know what they do yet. So I could actually just go out and pull out the keys and say, ask it for what the keys are. But it's getting the whole response and not just the body. So the body itself is still in there, and so we can see that the body's in there. And if we do that, it's still this JSON that we're pulling out. So nothing has changed there. And yeah, what did I do here? Okay. And we can explicitly give arguments to the HTTP get. In this case, we don't have to. I haven't found much difference in accept JSON here. It's just if some APIs might want to confirm that you'll accept JSON. So there's a whole bunch of options you can add onto that request as well. You can set up keys, and you can also include parameters in the actual URL itself, which we'll do a little bit later on. Cool. So what are we doing? Oh yeah, there we go. So we've got so we can pull out data from the body. And what else can we do? What else did I do? Did I do anything in here? Oops, oh, don't look at my key. You didn't see that. I'll have to change that key now. Oh yeah, so we can play around with this. So if we don't know what an API does, we can just get the response from there. So here we're just getting the whole thing. Where are we? There we go. So if we grab that, so if we want to see what kind of things are available, we can use keys function, because we are returning a map with as this response map, this hash map from HTTP get, then we can ask it what the keys are. So it'll hide all the values and just show us the actual keys. So there'll be a lot less information we can do, but we can see the basic structure, the top level structure of what it's doing. So we've got ops, bodies, headers, and status. So those are different sections we can kind of drill down into. So that helps us pull it up. So if we don't have a Swagger UI for us to have a look to like basically document the API for us, then we can basically pull down that API and as a response, and then look at what's inside the response, and then get the sections from that, and then also look at the keys in that as well. So we can drill down a whole bunch of things that way. And then, okay, and so we can do the same thing with CLJ HTTP. It works the same kind of way. And one of the things I did here was just write a simple status checker. So if I just wanted to have something that just runs every minute or so, and just to check whether our API is still up and running. So this is very simple server monitoring code if you want to. And so here we can get things. So we had a look at the keys in here. I think this should still work. Yeah, and so we can just go into client get, and we're getting some keys from there, and one of those keys was status, and so we can actually use the status to see and to get its value, and status 200. So this is a HTTP status code, which we looked at when we were building the server, and 200 means it's okay. So we could write a little main function in here, which is just checking the game scoreboard. So this is just printing out on the command line. So you just run this on the command line and it will print out it's checking the scoreboard API. And we just got a little let statement here that's basically having a look to see what the status is. So we're creating a local status name and binding that to the result of calling our HTTP client on the scoreboard, and then pulling out the value of status from that. So again, this is like a function call on the map that get client returns, and setting that value to our local variable, our local name. It's not a variable, doesn't vary Clojure. And then we can then check to see if that's status 200, and if it is, if that's true, then we print the game board scoreboard status is okay, and if it's false, then obviously we can print out there's some error, we're not getting the response back, so we can print out a little message, or we can email, we could do all sorts of stuff. We'd like to set off the alarms, whatever we need to do to inform people that our website could be down or not responsive. So that's pretty simple. And then I started looking at playing around with different options. Let's look at my key. So I've defined I've got an API key, which I'm definitely going to have to change now, which allows me to go and pull data from YouTube. Because I can go in and do a HTTP request to the YouTube API, which is in Google API's YouTube version 3, and I'm specifically asking for playlists. But it's saying that it's complaining, it's giving us a response. But if we actually looked at the body, then it's saying there's an error. So if we specifically look at the body, then okay, error, domain, global, reason required. Okay. Required parameter. So it's got a required parameter part. We need to include that as well. So we need some parameters to add to our request. It's going through the YouTube API. If you can go and work with the YouTube API, then you can probably work with pretty much anybody else's API. It is documented, but it's quite complex because you're dealing with millions of different types of accounts and playlists and content and types of content as well. So it is quite an involved API, but there are tools to help you navigate it. But one of the ways you can do that is just to write a little bit of Clojure code and play around and experiment. So I just grabbed here the body and I converted it to JSON. So we get this a map of errors, and it's a little bit easier to see this required parameter message here, because now it's written in. Now we convert it into a Clojure data structure rather than just being a bit of a JSON string, so it's a lot easier to read for us poor humans. And it's asking for a part parameter. So then I had to go and have a look at what that was. And you can see that, here's a print, is what preprint should have been looking like. So I did a Clojure preprint around it, and in the output, this is the pretty printed version of the response that we're getting as well. So it's a lot easier to read this and see the different sections in here because it's nicely formatted for me. And then, so I had a look at more information. I saw the curl example, and I saw that we need to put in the part, which is snippet for some reason, and the channel ID. Obviously, we want to get playlists for a particular channel, and the API key as well. So that's what the API key was for. And we can also put in access tokens and OAuth tokens and things like that as well. So let's have a look to see how we do that in Clojure. So we're using JSON string, so we're getting the body, but this time we're doing a request, not just to do playlists, but we're adding these parameters on the end of the request. And so we're adding snippets and channel. I'm not actually, I realized I wasn't actually using an OAuth token because this token isn't OAuth, it's an access token. So don't get tripped up on that. So there's this YouTube API key that I've done, which is just a string of the API key. The idea was to hide that from view, but I didn't get around to doing that, sorry. So you would basically, when you're doing this in production, you'd have an environment variable or some kind of secret store where you keep your keys, and obviously you wouldn't push those to the internet because that would be bad. And so what I've done is define the URL I want to create, which is this kind of URL with all the different parameters I want to include, including the API key. And so we've got part, also content details apparently is quite useful to add, but I'm not quite sure why. And then channel ID is the ID. So this is the unique part of the URL. When you go and look at a channel, this is for the Practicalli channel. Yeah, so I'd normally put the key in an env file. So either as an environment variable that I pull in, and you could use arrow, but again, I think you would still pull in that from the environment variable. And with services like Heroku, you can set an environment variable for that particular application. And so if you've got you deploy to production, it uses the production API key. If you deploy to testing or development, then it's using the development version of the API key, because you might have different usages, and you might have different data rates on those as well. Yeah, so any client credentials in Clojure, you don't really want to include them in the code, like I've done. That's very bad, especially if you put that onto GitHub. So you'd have them as an environment variable, and you read them. There's an env library you can use also to manage your environment variables as well. So I'll put that into the blog post this afternoon. And then, so what I'm doing here really is just building up the parameter and then inserting my not so secret key at the end. But that key should be secret, and then pushing that. I mean, this is not the end of the world, because it's an API key which I can just go into the web console and just regenerate anytime I want to. So if I think somebody else has got hold of it, then I'll just press a button and it updates, and then all I would need to do is just copy that back into, if I was doing it properly, I'd copy that back into an environment variable that's on my development machine, and yeah, nobody else will be able to use that API anymore, except for me. My pleasure. And so once we've actually got the right way of requesting the information, then we can go in and actually just request it. So here I'm just doing a HTTP GET again, so I haven't changed anything. We've got the YouTube playlist URL, which is the playlist that has all the parts that YouTube wants us to provide. So it wants us to know what snippet, what kind of part we're getting, what channel ID we're getting, and our API key. And then we get a result here, which is a huge amount of stuff that we're getting. And this is just the body. So we can get the full request as well. But here I'm just getting the body. And it's essentially got, oops, oh yeah, there we go. It's essentially got several keys in the body that we can play around with. So the kind is what kind of content it is, and the items are the specific things that are inside each of those items. So if it's a playlist, then you've got all the name of the playlist, the ID of the playlist as well. So there's a huge amount of stuff there. So you need to go in and unpick this and experiment with it as well. And what did I do? How far did I get? And that's about as far as I got with that. But I can use this now to be able to pull out the playlist information and write a nice kind of UI website that just lists particular things and allows me to sort the information, because I'll pull out the playlists and then I'll go and get information specifically for that playlist. And because here we're just getting the playlists for the channel. I've got 3 playlists, so this is just the information for 3 playlists, and this is just the overall information. So this has got channel art and it's got descriptions and stuff like that in as well. So you can see in the middle here we've got like title and description. So this is a Clojure and CLI tools deps playlist I created, and so I can go in and get the ID for this, which is here, and then I can go and pull out. I can do another request to YouTube using the client that uses this ID, and then I can generate eventually generate a nice Clojure data structure that's got all the details I want to be able to create my own web page that allows me to present the videos that are available in that available in that YouTube playlist, and allow people to sort things and search on tags and stuff like that. So all the things you wish you could do on the standard YouTube interface, which is quite minimal as well. So if you want to build a nice website around this, then I've got all the data to do that. I just need to find the time to actually sit down and complete that. Cool. So one of the tools that is helping me is if I've got that. Oh yeah. So that one there. So that one there. That one there. Nope. I lost it now. Oh, there we go. That's the one. Let's just drag this over here. Boop. Come on. Boom. So YouTube does come with this try this API section, and this kind of allows you to put in information, and it'll use your OAuth account. So when you do execute something, it just pops up and uses your account. There's a little pop-up. You can choose which account you want, which is popped up on a different screen. And then it runs the it's basically running the API call. So this is your client, and these are the parameters that I'm passing in, and so I can then get the code as a response here. You can't see that because it's my head's in the way. There we go. There we go. And so this helps me understand if I'm getting the right kind of information there as well. So this is like the kind of Swagger type interface that we get with YouTube API as well. Cool. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. So I'll write all this up and put this onto the blog, so you can follow that in step-by-step detail. Apologies for not getting that finished in time. It's been a bit of a hectic week. Yeah, and I'll also be doing, just as before I go, I'll also be doing a whole number of blogs on here. So I'm joining in with Plexus, so the person behind Lambda Island, and we're doing what we call an advent of parens. Oop, I can't type anymore. Oops. Oops. Yeah, I did mean Lambda Island. There we go. So Lambda Island is another kind of really good website full of tutorials. There's some free, there's some commercial ones, but he's doing a blog every day for the December, for the holidays, and so I'm doing that as well. Oh, there we go, Advent of Parens. So it's a bit of a challenge. They're not going to be long blogs. Oh, there's me. Cool. Oh, and there's Alexander. So there's a few other people doing this as well. So if you have any other suggestions, any suggestions about things we can blog about, any tips you want to share, and feel free to get in touch either on Clojure on the Clojure community Slack community, or if you go, you can actually go into the contributing section, and you can actually raise some article ideas there as well. You go in and click on that. You can go and suggest some articles that you'd like me to work on, or if you've got an article that you'd like to contribute to a Practicalli blog, if you don't have your own blog but you still want to write something, I'm more than happy to help you get that up and running as well. Cool. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there and finish off my homework and write up this blog post. And thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you found that useful. Again, it's like having a nice client, or a client you can experiment with, does help you understand well, how to use the API if it's somebody else's. But if you're also designing your own API, then it's a great way to understand whether your API is useful, how easy it is to use. And so it's not a case of, if you're designing an API, you just get the data out there. It's great to have some feedback on how that's going to be used, and should you design your API in a different way? Should you provide more views of your API as well? And it's one way to help you, evolve the design of your API and make sure you're getting people to use your API as well. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me on all the channels we mentioned at the start of the video. And thank you very much. If you're at Reclojure on Monday, then I'm happy to talk to anybody there as well. Thank you. Goodbye.